Hello, greetings. Welcome to Attaining the Second Cognition. This is Doug Michael once again. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for taking your time to join me and to open your mind and consider this information. It's greatly appreciated. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the title of this presentation is Subversive Cultural Marxism and Fabian Disinformation. This video, as with others I've done, is liable to piss a lot of people off, particularly union members in general. The modern idea of workers' unions was the brainchild of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels when they composed the Communist Manifesto in 1848. As early as the 1760s in the U.S., unions were being formed by craftsmen in order to preserve quality in workmanship and stop counterfeiting of their goods, thereby cheapening the products they produced. These earlier attempts at union formation were not the organizing of those employed by the later robber barons, but were instead a collaboration of craftsmen usually producing their own goods through self-employment. It wasn't until after Marx's revolutionary policies and his declaration of war against the capitalist systems, allegedly in favor of the repressed workers, that trade unionism finally migrated to the United States. The first major union formation was a creation of a Freemasonic secret society organization called the Noble and Holy Knights of Labor, which was described as the most important and by far the largest secret society in the United States organized in the interest of industrial workers. The Knights of Labor was organized in 1869. I'm providing a link in the description section about the Knights of Labor for those interested enough to look it up. In the climate of those times, with the robber barons like John D. Rockefeller and railroad magnate Jay Gould abusing employees with excessively long work days, using child labor, and the lack of reparations for those injured on the job, the circumstances were ripe for the formation of labor unions. By the 1880s, anarchists had infiltrated the labor movement, and an incident at Haymarket Square in Chicago, where a bomb was exploded during a labor strike on May 4, 1886, triggered national arrests and repression of unions. The continuation of radical unionism was later illustrated in 1921 in what is known as the Battle of Blair Mountain, in which 10,000 well-armed coal miners in West Virginia fought with 3,000 mine police and strikebreakers in the bloodiest labor dispute in U.S. history, with over 1 million rounds being fired in the battle. The U.S. Army eventually had to be called in to stop the uprising. Contrary to modern usage of the term redneck, mostly used to disparage Southerners or hillbillies, the word redneck was first quoted in regard to these coal mine union organizers because they all wore red handkerchiefs to show their solidarity. It was the interference of Leninists that ultimately associated trade unionists with the term Reds, the primary basis of the movie by the same name. Now, by reporting this, I'm not giving the brutal robber barons in both the US and the UK a free pass. They created working conditions that were deplorable. Because they were all psychopathic profit mongers, they laid the ground for the Marxists and Socialists to gain attention with the working classes and drive the movements for union organizing, as well as lay the foundation for the welfare state as a means for wealth redistribution. Despite the idea that egalitarianism, the equality of all people, was voiced by Thomas Paine and the redistribution of wealth as to how this should be done, redistribution of wealth doesn't gravitate from the rich to the poor, but from the middle working class to the poor, thereby creating a two-tiered class system with the middle class being taxed into oblivion in order for the welfare state to function. We can plainly observe the results of this here in the U.S. as the middle class has become all but extinct. In the end, it is only the ultra-rich who get richer, which will ultimately lead to a state of world feudalism, which will naturally be controlled by the Fabian Marxist progressives and the Theosophical World Revolution sponsored and controlled by the Lucius Trust. I am posting a link to a 16-minute video interview with Yuri Bezmenov that explains how communist subversion works through propaganda to destroy cultures from within and, through multiple generations, alter the perceptions of society through constant media control and propaganda assaults. This is achieved by controlling every avenue of the media, through the education systems, through the news media, through controlling the publishing houses that supply books to our schools, and through controlling every bit of spiritual propaganda in the marketplace. Let's not leave out manufactured scarcity and the pursuit of materialism. With this much control, no one seeking personal advancement can go anywhere without winding up on the doorstep of the fucking divine. From its etymological roots, the word divine comes from the Latin divinus and simply means of a god. The modern definition is of relating to or proceeding directly from God or a god. Do you really think this is all simply accidental? There is a tremendous amount of money behind this global propaganda mill, and Lucius Trust sits right at ground zero with this Fabian Marxist spiritual circus. As Bezmenov notes in this video, the objective to undermine a nation through gradualist subversive tactics is to overload people's perceptions by providing too much conflicting information, most of which is geared to sow discontent with their system of government. By gradualist indoctrination through total media blitzes and a multi-pronged approach to sow confusion among the populace, the people can find no outlet for truth. The alleged truth-tellers are, for the most part, agents of propaganda. We have already exposed the four horsemen of the alleged truth movement, but in addition to these theosophical disinformation agents, you can add people like Lyndon LaRouche and his Institute for Historical Review, or IHR. The IHR is allegedly another one of those truth-telling organizations that is also involved in peddling anti-government information. As Wikipedia informs us about LaRouche, while in India he developed sympathy for the Indian independence movement. LaRouche wrote that many GIs feared they would be asked to support British forces in actions against Indian independence forces and characterized that prospect as revolting to most of us. He discussed Marxism in the CO camp, and while traveling home on the SS General Bradley in 1946, he met Don Merrill, a fellow soldier also from Lynn, who converted him to Trotskyism. Back in the U.S., he resumed his education at Northeastern University. He returned to Lynn in 1948, and the next year joined the Socialist Workers' Party, the SWP, adopting the name Lynn Marcus for his political work. With these two short passages, we find that LaRouche not only supported the Theosophical Society's Indian independence movement spearheaded by the Theosophist Mahatma Gandhi, but also that he is a devoted communist Trotskyite. Given this information, how valid is his revisionist history when it just provides more propaganda and confusion to the mix of alleged truth-touters? Another element in the subversion machine of the Fabian Marxist is the agent provocateur. An agent provocateur, according to the Wikipedia definition, is a person who commits or who acts to entice another person to commit an illegal or rash act or falsely implicate them in partaking in an illegal act. An agent provocateur may be acting out of their own sense of duty or may be employed by the police or other entity to discredit or harm another group, such as a peaceful protest or demonstration, by provoking them to commit a crime, thereby undermining the protest or demonstration as a whole. Now, many of my listeners know that Wikipedia is not always the purveyor of truth and often resorts to propaganda and censorship. This description of the agent provocateur is a prime example of selective reporting and propaganda. This definition leads people to the incorrect perception that agents provocateurs are only put in place by police and government operatives. The fact is that an agent provocateur can and often has been the Marxist anarchist. It is these subversives working to disrupt societies who insert themselves in peaceful protests, who secretly carry guns or bombs and use them to either destroy the potentially positive effects of a peaceful demonstration or to put blame on the police or government for their own subversive actions, which is called creating a red herring. The present leftist Fabian agenda is no different than the Marxist agenda to destabilize a society. Probably the most evident examples of agents provocateurs at work in the U.S. culture today can be found within the Black Lives Matter movement. By inserting agents provocateurs into peaceful demonstrations, who then either target innocent protesters and blame the shooting on the police, or by shooting cops to create a violent reaction by both sides, the agents provocateurs serve to undermine any chance at civil resolution to these problems. Once the violence erupts, then the controlled media starts spinning the stories to stir up racial tensions. This is a hallmark of not only agents provocateurs, but is also the basis for false flag operations like the sinking of the Maine in 1898 to incite the Spanish-American War in Cuba. To this list of false flag operations designed to inflame the emotions in order to lead a nation into war, we can add the orchestrated sinking of the Lusitania in 1915, which served as the catalyst to get the U.S. involved in World War I, the burning of the Reichstag, which brought Hitler to power, the bombing of Pearl Harbor to draw the U.S. into World War II, and bringing down the Twin Towers on 9/11/2001 in order to inflame emotions and to act as a justification for U.S. incursions into Afghanistan and Iraq. We reported in the Lucius Trust and Energetic Manipulation video how the secret societies and the theosophists manufacture events to harvest energies to put these energies behind advancing their agenda for global domination. Sometimes these energy harvests are only local in scope, reaching to a national level, and other times they reach global proportions. We reported how the global harmonic convergence served as a more positive spin deception, but I want to cover a few other events that also served as major global energy harvests. Although the sinking of the Lusitania was not what one would call a global galvanizing event, the First World War was one hell of an energy harvest. War always produces high emotions, despair, and bloodshed. In complete honesty, you have to view the loss of lives in World War I as a massive sacrifice of the lives of human cattle in order to push forward the inorganic hierarchy and the Fabian globalist agenda. The energy harvested from all that bloodshed laid the foundation for setting the stage for an even more profound, contrived human sacrifice called World War II. Although way too much focus has been continually shoved down the world's throat about the alleged 6 million Jews who died in the concentration camps, which numbers have been downsized by about 2 million, but that goes largely unreported to the public at large. A communist Jew named Lazar Kaganovich is probably the greatest mass murderer in history, reportedly being personally responsible for 40 million deaths. How many of you have ever heard of Lazar Kaganovich, or of his responsibility for 40 million deaths in communist Russia? Hell, in comparison to Kaganovich, Hitler was only a mass murderer wannabe. Since the Fabians and Theosophical Lucius Trust organization operates worldwide, do you doubt for 1 second that these energies were not also harvested to push forward the Fabian Aryan agenda along with their inorganic masters? Kaganovich and 3 other associates were finally tried in 2010, long after they were all dead, for genocide in what is known in the Ukraine as the Holodomor. Since these Aryan fucks think they are the only human beings on the planet and view the vast majority of humanity as simply expendable cattle to them, as reported in our pastoralism video, then maybe you can start to understand the psychopathy of these sick bastards as well as the inorganic ascended monsters who directed their plans from on high. So let's take a look at an event that truly rocked the world, the JFK assassination. It is not widely known in the U.S. that John Kennedy was a pupil of the Fabian educator Harold Joseph Lasky, a professor of political science at the London School of Economics, a creation of the Fabian Society. The vast majority of Americans believe JFK to be some kind of statesman and a great man. Endall has recently read a book published in 2008 called JFK and the Unspeakable by James W. Douglas. It was while reading this book about events leading up to the assassination that led Endall to investigate whether JFK had any ties to the Fabian Society or not. Lo and behold, he found a connection with the Fabian London School of Economics and Harold Lasky. It was through reading Kennedy's policies in this book that Endall saw Fabian fingerprints over his entire administration. Kennedy was ever seeking compromise with communist governments, pushing the Fabian agenda of harmonizing capitalism and communism. Kennedy went against the corporations when he tore apart U.S. Steel. He pissed off the CIA as well, and the hawk warmongers in the Pentagon when he refused to do a preemptive nuclear strike on Russia. He pissed on the CIA when he left the CIA with their asses hanging out in the Bay of Pigs fiasco. He pissed on the Federal Reserve when he printed non-interest-bearing $2 U.S. Treasury notes rather than fiat money Federal Reserve notes. In my opinion, this is most likely the main reason that he was murdered. He was holding private communications with Nikita Khrushchev leading up to the Cuban Missile Crisis in October 1962, and he was keeping secret correspondence with Fidel Castro, seeking to normalize relations behind the back of his administration and the CIA. In every one of these incidents, we find the nasty stink of the Fabian global agenda. Rather than work through Congress and the Senate, Kennedy used Alice Bailey's United Nations to deliver his message about world peace on behalf of his theosophical Fabian fellow travelers. While the CIA and its operatives were trying to start a war with the Vietnamese so they could gain control of the opium poppy fields on the Golden Triangle, working behind Kennedy's back, JFK was seeking accommodation between the governments of South Vietnam and Communist North Vietnam, working to harmonize communism and capitalism to fulfill the Fabian Marxist agenda. Given this information, is there any wonder that just about everyone wanted this Fabian operative president dead? With this information now in hand, let's look at the assassination itself. For all intents and purposes, Kennedy's murder was a well-orchestrated sacrifice, with Oswald scapegoated as the fall guy. The JFK assassination was the 9/11 of the 60s. Just imagine how much energy was harvested from the cognitive shock of people all around the world when they learned he was dead. After Kennedy's death, the U.S. got involved in Vietnam, even though JFK fully recognized that it would turn into the quagmire war that it did based on the French being entrenched in a similar war before our involvement. It was nothing but a wasted expenditure of human lives. Also, the fucking CIA could get control of the opium fields of Southeast Asia. The CIA subsequently did the same thing with the formulated war in Afghanistan, and over the past decade, we've seen an exponential growth in heroin use in the U.S., and it has reached epidemic proportions. Hundreds of witnesses made statements that contradicted the official Warren report, but their testimonies were swept under the rug, just as the many credible 9/11 witnesses that claimed to have heard multiple explosions coming from the sub-basement levels of the Twin Towers had their testimonies discounted. Many of the witnesses to the JFK assassination that have come forward, including FBI and CIA agents, received death threats to this day. 177 people involved in the case have died under mysterious circumstances, including several Dallas policemen. After the Kennedy assassination, witnesses were intimidated, discredited, and murdered. Within hours, Oswald was blamed and demonized in the media, just as bin Laden was taking the fall within hours after 9/11. And just like the 9/11 Commission report, the Warren Commission report was an absolute whitewash. Coincidentally, Oswald was murdered by Jack Ruby before he ever got to tell his story, and the murder took place very close to where Kennedy was killed. Oswald also had connections with the FBI and the ONI, Office of Naval Intelligence, and operated out of an office which was shared by CIA agent Howard Hunt. The only person ever convicted in the murder of Kennedy was a man named Clay Shaw, who also had connections to the CIA. After the assassination, evidence was removed and tampered with, and documents were locked away under national security restrictions. Witnesses began to die, including policemen that would testify to attorney Jim Garrison, who was investigating the case to prove a conspiracy to commit the murder of President Kennedy. Garrison's investigation was obstructed and compromised by high-level people within the intelligence community, and he was thoroughly discredited in the media, which is what happens when anyone dares to challenge the consortium. Apparently, the Mafia was also involved in JFK's murder and was allied with the CIA, and at the top, both organizations are controlled by the consortium. Key information was simply discarded from the official Warren report, just as crucial information was deliberately left out of the official 9/11 Commission report. History repeats. The consortium placed its own people within the commissions to investigate itself so that the key evidence would be ignored and fabricated distortions could be presented as truth. With JFK being set up as the sacrificial lamb and the energy emitted worldwide by his death, the inorganic Aryan energetic death squads started the destruction of the U.S. in earnest, sponsoring both the anti-war movement as well as starting the flower powers, sex, drugs, and rock and roll revolution. Returning veterans from Vietnam were scorned, spat on, and called baby killers, and the nation's morale sunk into the gutter. With the advent of LBJ's rise to power as president, the Fabian agenda was pushed forward even more through LBJ's Great Society programs, which was merely the next phase of the Fabian destruction of America, started by FDR's New Deal programs after the orchestrated Wall Street crash that led to the Great Depression. 24 years after Kennedy's assassination, the Theosophists created their harmonic convergence scam in order to harvest energies so they could launch the whole New Age propaganda program for making humanity spiritually subservient to inorganic and Aryan Fabian chicanery. Behind all of this, we find the Lucius Trust and its think tanks and manipulators of the entire world's population through propaganda and cognitive psychological warfare. 10 years after the 1987 harmonic convergence energy harvest on a global scale, we find a more minor energy harvesting with the death, probably murder, of Princess Diana on August 31st, 1997. On 9/11/2001, the next great energy harvest took place with the orchestrated attacks on the World Trade Center complex. With these latest events, the Aryan overlords, working for their inorganic ascended masters, were gearing up for what the inorganics hoped would finally lead to the fulfillment of Lucius Trust's great plan, creating the alleged global shift in consciousness where the inorganics truly believed they would fulfill their reprehensible 6,000-year-old agenda to fold all of humanity's consciousness under their control, which they prophesied would occur at the end of the Mayan calendar in December of 2012. Well, we all know how that worked out, don't we? The current manipulation of humanity through forced immigration, what I call controlled destabilization, the lack of enforcing immigration laws, financial instability worldwide, the ratcheting up of racial tensions in the U.S., and cultural friction brought about through conflicts in religious ideologies in Europe, the stage has been set for the Fabian inorganic theosophical agenda to play out. Around the world, people are starting to wake up to the tyranny, although most of the information they are finding is formulated propaganda created by Lucius Trust organizations worldwide. Too many people still jump at the Illuminati boogeyman or fear Satan and his minions so much to yet fully embrace the larger truth, but that time for listening is getting closer by the day. Those who are watching these videos and contemplating the information are the vanguard of the hard truth, no matter how crazy it sounds to your present level of controlled and contrived perceptions. The words of the controllers tell you this is true through the information about the bullshit artist Ascended Masters, as well as their Fabian globalist agenda. The evidence is there in front of your eyes. You only have to see it and accept it for what it is. Their own words tell the tale, and they can't unsay what they have said or unwrite what they have written. It is past time that humanity as a whole wake up from this cognitive tyranny and start making the perpetrators pay for their crimes against all of humanity. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for taking your time to listen to Attaining the Second Cognition. I greatly appreciate it. I extend my gratitude and my deepest thanks to any and to all who take the time to open their minds and search for the truth and to push forward in their own cognitive advancement and willful evolution. Once again, thank you so much. This is Doug Michael, and until next time, walk in peace.